Good morning. Thank you for joining today's daily webinar where we discuss your live questions on the air. So go ahead and shoot those over as we cover today's topic, which is when is my first solo 401k require minimum distribution required? As always, please like our video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and share it as it helps to get the word out to other solopreneurs like yourself. Give me one moment here, please. Make sure everybody can hear me. Okay, I think the volume was down there. So again, thank you for joining today's daily webinar where we discuss your questions live on the air. So go ahead and shoot those over. We also cover certain topics on our daily webinars. Today's topic is, when is my first solo 401k require minimum distribution required? So we're going to go over that topic. And today's webinar is for educational purposes. As always, please like this video and subscribe to it as it helps to get the word out to other solopreneurs like yourself. So a required minimum distribution is essentially when the government requires that you start taking distributions from not only your IRA, but also your self-directed 401k. For the required minimum distributions that apply to a solo 401k plan, essentially they apply once you reach age 73. That's number one. Number two, only pre-tax solo 401k funds are subject to require minimum distributions. Roth solo 401k funds are not subject to require minimum distributions while you're still alive. And you have the Secure Act 2.0 to thank for that. It used to be that you had to require minimum distributions from your Roth solo 401k funds as well, in addition to the pre-tax solo 401k funds. Well, with the passage of Secure Act 2.0, not only can you wait to make this require minimum distributions once you're age 73, so the age increased, but what is more, you are now required to require minimum distributions from the Roth solo 401k plan, therefore putting it on an even playing field with Roth IRAs, as Roth IRAs are also now subject to require minimum distributions. Now, let's talk about the first required minimum distribution. So as I already elaborated, you are required to require minimum distributions from your solo 401k plan once you reach age 73. However, you can delay taking that first year RMD. You can delay in taking that first required minimum distribution you can take it by April 1st of the following year instead of taking it in the year that you turn age 73. Give me one moment here. So, for example, let's say that in 2025 you turn age 73. Let's further assume that you have both pre-tax solo 401k funds as well as Roth solo 401k funds. Well, you're not going to be subject to taking an RMD from your Roth solo 401k funds. However, those pre-tax solo 401k funds are subject to that required minimum distribution. However, because you turn age 73 in 2025, you can either take that required minimum distribution this year in 2025 by December 31st, or you can delay in taking that first required minimum distribution until April 1st of 2026. So if you delay in taking that first required minimum distribution, which is the one due in 2025, until April 1st of 2026, you're going to have to take two required minimum distributions in 2026. In 2026. You're going to have to process the year 2025 required minimum distribution by April 1st, and then that 2026 required minimum distribution by December 31st of 2026. So in short, only your very first required minimum distribution when you turn age 73 can be delayed until April 1st of the following year, but you're going to have to take two RMDs in that following year. In this example, that would be the 2025 required minimum distribution by April 1st of 2026, and the 2026 required minimum distribution by December 31st of 2026. So you're only allowed to delay that first RMD until April 1st, not any future required minimum distributions. Now, the required minimum distribution is calculated based on your life expectancy and your age, of course. And it typically follows the uniform lifetime table. That's the table that is used to calculate your required minimum distributions. Here's that table here. We have it on our website. It kind of goes over it. You can also use our solo 401k online required minimum distribution calculator to calculate your RMD. Here's a page to our solo 401k required minimum distribution calculator. Let me see if I can get to it here. There it is. So those are the items to know regarding required minimum distributions and when you need to take it. Now, here's a couple tidbits to be aware of. If you also have an IRA, a traditional IRA, that IRA is going to be subject to a separate required minimum distribution. In other words, you can't say, well, I'm going to go ahead and take my IRA required minimum distribution amount from my solo 401k plan, since I also have to take an RMD for my solo 401k plan. You can't do that. You got to take it from each account separately. So from the IRA and then separately from the solo 401k plan. Vice versa. You can't say, well, I'm going to go ahead and take my solo 401k required minimum distribution from my IRA. That's not allowed either. You got to take it separately from each the IRA and the solo 401k plan. Don't confuse the IRA required minimum distribution regulations, where if you have multiple IRAs, you can process the RMD from one IRA based on the total value of all your IRAs. That same exception does not apply to solo 401k plans. Another example is, let's say you have a full-time employer 401k. So not a solo 401k, but a daytime employer 401k, and you're required to take RMDs from that 401k. Well, you cannot take the RMD for that 401k from your solo 401k and vice versa. In other words, you have to take an RMD from each separate 401k plan. And this is an example, one from the full-time employer 401k, and the second one from the solo 401k. So those aggregation RMD rules do not apply to 401k plans either. Now, we often get a question about, am I required to take a required minimum distribution from my solo 401k plan since I'm still working? Well, the answer is yes. You are required to take an RMD from your solo 401k, even if you're still working. Reason being is that that still working exception does not apply to solo 401k plans. It only applies to full-time employer 401k plans. So if you have a full-time employer 401k, so you work for an employer, you're not required to make distributions from that 401k if you're still working for that employer. That's called the 5% full-time employer exception rule, aka traditional 401k RMD exception rule. Well, with the solo 401k plan, that rule does not apply because the solo 401k is for owner-only businesses, which means you are the owner in your business that sponsors the solo 401k plan, and therefore you are required to make and or process require minimum distributions from your solo 401k, specifically the pre-tax solo 401k funds once you reach age 73. So those are some important things to also understand. Okay, that's what we wanted to cover on today's topic, which is when is my first solo 401k require minimum distribution required? One last tidbit on that is that for clients of my solo 401k financial, we will issue that Form 1099-R to report that require minimum distribution to the IRS, provided that you timely request that from us. And we don't charge additional fees for processing that type of Form 1099-R reporting. Okay, I don't see any live questions at the moment. Again, thank you for joining today's daily webinar. We'll be back again tomorrow. Until then, have a great rest of the day.